Ciro's nightclub on the Sunset Strip was the kind of place where power came to play. It was March 17th, 1963, a Friday night, and the room was packed with Hollywood royalty, studio executives, and the kind of men who made their money in ways nobody asked about too closely. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and expensive perfume. Champagne flowed like water. Frank Sinatra was supposed to perform later, but right now, the entertainment was a crowd itself. At a corner table near the bar sat Jeanne Martin, Dean's wife. She was elegant in a black evening gown, her dark hair swept up, diamonds at her throat. She'd come with two other wives from their circle, a girls' night out, while Dean was in Palm Springs meeting with some business associates. Jeanne was laughing at something one of her friends had said, her face radiant, completely unaware that she was being watched. Vincent, Vinnie the Vise, Romano sat 3 tables away with 4 of his crew. He was a capo in a mid-level East Coast family that had been trying to expand their operations into California with limited success. Vinnie was in his late 40s, broad-shouldered and thick around the middle, with slick back hair and a gold pinky ring that caught the light every time he lifted his glass. He'd been drinking since 6 o'clock. It was now past 11. Vinnie had a problem with Jeanne Martin. Not a personal problem. They'd never met. It was a philosophical problem. See, Vinnie believed that entertainers were servants, dancing monkeys who existed to amuse people like him. The fact that Jeanne Martin had money, influence, and respect, that he moved in the same circles as powerful men and was treated as an equal, that offended Vinnie on a fundamental level. In Vinnie's world, there was a hierarchy. Men like him were at the top. Entertainers were somewhere near the bottom, just above civilians. And Jeanne Martin's wife, sitting there in her diamonds and designer gown, looking like she belonged, looking like she was somebody, that was an insult to the natural order of things. "Look at her," Vinnie said to his crew, loud enough that nearby tables could hear. "Queen of the castle, married to a song and dance man, and acts like she's royalty." His guys laughed on cue. They always did. Jeanne heard it, but didn't react. Women in her position learned early that reacting to comments from drunk men only made things worse. She continued her conversation, but one of her friends, Paula, glanced nervously at Vinnie's table. "Maybe we should go," Paula whispered. "I'm not leaving because of some loud drunk," Jeanne said quietly, but there was tension in her voice now. She'd grown up in a small town in Ohio, married young to a football player, divorced, then married Dean in 1949. She'd learned to navigate Hollywood, learned to handle attention and jealousy, and the occasional inappropriate advance. But there was something different about the look in Vinnie Romano's eyes. Something cold and mean. Vinnie stood up. His crew went quiet, sensing something was about to happen. He picked up his drink, a scotch on the rocks, and walked toward Jeanne's table. The room didn't go completely silent, but people noticed. People always notice when men like Vincent Romano moved with purpose. He stopped at Jeanne's table, looming over the 3 women. Up close, he smelled like expensive cologne, cigar smoke, and too much liquor. "Mrs. Martin," he said, his voice dripping with false courtesy, "I don't believe we've been introduced." Vincent Romano. Jeanne looked up at him with cool composure. "Mr. Romano, if you'll excuse us, we're having a private conversation." "Private conversation," Vinnie repeated, as if tasting the words. "In a public place. Interesting concept." He took a sip of his drink. "You know what I find interesting? How your husband forgets where he comes from. Forgets that without people like me, places like this don't exist. The clubs, the casinos, the whole playground you people get to perform in, that's our world. You just work here. My husband doesn't work for anyone," Jeanne said, her voice steady but harder now. "And I think you should return to your table." That's when Vinnie's face changed. The false courtesy evaporated, replaced by something ugly. "You think you can dismiss me? You think because you married some crooner who tells jokes and sings songs, you're somebody? Let me tell you something. Sweetheart, you're nobody. You're the wife of a dancing monkey. And you should show some respect when your betters are talking to you." Jeanne started to stand, ready to leave. Vinnie grabbed her wrist. Not gently, but hard enough to make her wince. "I'm not finished," he said. "Let go of me," Jeanne said, her voice loud enough now that nearby conversation stopped. Vinnie leaned in close, his face inches from hers. Or what? You gonna tell your husband? You gonna have Jeanne Martin come sing me a song about it? Then he did it. He released her wrist and, with his open hand, slapped Jeanne Martin across the face. Not hard enough to knock her down, but hard enough to snap her head to the side, hard enough to leave a red mark on her cheek, hard enough that the sound carried across the room like a gunshot. The entire nightclub went silent. Completely, utterly silent. It was as if someone had hit a pause button on reality. Jeanne stood there, one hand on her reddening cheek, shock and humiliation flooding her face. Her friends were frozen. The bartender had stopped mid-pour. The cigarette girl stood with her mouth open. Vinnie smiled. He'd made his point. He'd put Jeanne Martin's wife in her place, shown everyone in this room that fame and money didn't mean anything, that respect and power came from somewhere else. He'd humiliated her publicly, made her look weak, made her husband look weak by extension. Maybe next time you'll show some respect, Vinnie said quietly, then turned and walked back to his table, where his crew sat in stunned silence, not sure whether to cheer or disappear. Jeanne gathered her things with shaking hands. She didn't cry. She wouldn't give him that. But her face was flushed with shame and anger as she and her friends hurried out of Ciro's, past gawking patrons, past a doorman who'd seen everything and looked horrified. Vinnie Romano ordered another round for his table. He felt good, powerful. He'd just shown Hollywood that the old rules still applied, that entertainers and their families existed at the pleasure of men like him. What Vinnie Romano didn't understand, what he couldn't possibly have understood, was that he'd just made the worst mistake of his life. The phone call that changed everything. Jeanne Martin was at his Palm Springs home, sitting on the patio overlooking the golf course, when the phone rang at 12:30 a.m. He'd been having drinks with two associates, discussing a potential film deal. The conversation stopped when Jeanne's housekeeper, Maria, came out looking worried. "Mr. Martin, it's Mrs. Martin. She says it's urgent." Jeanne took the call in his study. When Jeanne's voice came through the line, he could hear that she'd been crying, though she was trying to hide it. "Jeanne, something happened tonight." He listened as she told him about Ciro's, about Vincent Romano, about the slap. With each detail, Jeanne's face remained perfectly still, but his hand tightened around the phone until his knuckles went white. "Where are you now?" he asked, his voice quiet and controlled. "Home. Paula and Janet drove me." "Jeanne, I'm okay, I'll be there in 2 hours," Jeanne said. "Lock the doors. Don't answer if anyone comes to the house. I'm leaving right now." "Jeanne, please don't do anything. I love you, Jeanne. I'll see you soon." He hung up and stood there for a moment, processing. Then he made 2 more phone calls. The first was to a man named Jack Morrison, a private investigator who'd worked for several major studios and had connections that ran deep into both legitimate and illegitimate businesses. The second call was to someone Jeanne never identified, but whose influence in Los Angeles was considerable. Then Jeanne Martin got his Cadillac and drove toward Los Angeles, doing 90 miles an hour on empty desert highways, his mind working through what needed to happen next. Here's what Jeanne Martin didn't do. He didn't call the police, because in 1963 Los Angeles, a mobster slapping an entertainer's wife wasn't something the police were going to prioritize, especially when that mobster was connected. He didn't call the newspapers, because public scandal would only humiliate Jeanne further. He didn't tell Frank Sinatra, because Frank's response would be immediate, violent, and would start a war that nobody needed. And he didn't call Vincent Romano to threaten him, scream at him, or challenge him to a confrontation. Because Jeanne Martin understood something that most people didn't. Violence was easy. Anger was easy. The reaction everyone expected was easy. But Jeanne Martin wasn't going to do what was easy. He was going to do what was effective. By the time Jeanne arrived home, Jeanne was asleep, exhausted from crying and shock. Jeanne sat in the dark living room, thinking. He'd built his career on charm, on making everything look effortless, on being a relaxed, easygoing member of the Rat Pack, while Frank was intense and Sammy was dynamic. People saw Jeanne Martin and thought he was just a lucky guy who could sing and happened to be funny. What they didn't see was the calculation behind every move. Jeanne Martin had grown up Dino Crocetti in Steubenville, Ohio, the son of an Italian immigrant barber. He'd worked in steel mills, dealt cards in illegal gambling houses, and learned early that the world was divided into people who made things happen and people who had things happen to them. He decided a long time ago which category he wanted to be in. Dean had spent 20 years building relationships. He knew studio heads, casino owners, politicians, and yes, organized crime figures. He'd been careful to be friendly with everyone while being owned by no one. He had friends in every circle, had done favors, had collected favors owed. He understood power, real power, not the performative kind that Vinnie Romano had displayed tonight. And now, he was going to use it. The investigation. Jack Morrison arrived at Dean's house at 8 o'clock the next morning. He was a former LAPD detective turned private investigator, a thin man in his 50s with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He'd worked for Dean before on various matters, background checks on business partners, tracking down problematic ex-associates of Dean's from his early days. Jack was discreet, thorough, and expensive. Dean met him in the study and handed him a piece of paper with a name written on it. Vincent Romano. "I need to know everything," Dean said quietly. "Where he lives, where his family lives, his wife, his kids, his mother if she's still alive, where they go to church, where the kids go to school, their routines, their friends, everywhere they feel safe. I need photographs of all of it. I need documentation. And Jack, I need it fast. Within a week." Jack looked at the name, then at Dean. He'd heard what happened at Ciro's. Word had already spread through certain channels. "This is about last night. This is about a man who put his hands on my wife and humiliated her in public," Dean said. "This is about showing him that was a mistake. You want to hurt his family?" "No," Dean said firmly. "I want to show him that I could if I wanted to. There's a difference. Nobody gets hurt, Jack. Nobody gets threatened. But Vincent Romano needs to understand something about power. Real power isn't what you do. It's what you're capable of doing and choose not to." Jack nodded slowly. "You're going to need more than just me for this. The kind of detail you're talking about, a week timeline, we'll need at least 4 operatives. Then hire 4 operatives. Cost isn't an issue. Discretion is everything." Jack Morrison left with a retainer check that would have bought a new Cadillac. Within hours, he had a team assembled. These weren't amateur investigators or gumshoes. They were professionals who'd worked for government agencies, for major corporations, for people who needed information gathered quietly and thoroughly. What Jeanne Martin had set in motion was a surveillance operation that would have impressed the FBI. But this wasn't about gathering evidence for prosecution. This was about something far more psychological. Vincent Romano lived in a large house in Hancock Park, a wealthy neighborhood in central Los Angeles. His wife, Maria, was 42, still attractive, and spent her days shopping, attending Mass at Sacred Heart Catholic Church, and playing bridge with other mob wives. They had 3 children. Vincent Jr., who was 19 and worked in one of his father's import-export businesses. Angela, 16, who attended an all-girls Catholic school and wanted to be a teacher. And little Sophia, just 12, who loved horses and took riding lessons every Saturday morning. Vinnie's mother, Carmela Romano, was 73 and lived in a small house that Vinnie had bought for her in Boyle Heights. She went to early Mass every single morning at 6 a.m., then had breakfast at the same diner, then walked to the park to feed pigeons. She'd done the same routine for years. Over the course of 6 days, Jack Morrison's team documented everything. They photographed Maria shopping at Bullock's department store. They photographed Angela walking to school with her friends, laughing, her school books clutched to her chest. They photographed little Sophia at her riding lesson, sitting on a brown mare, smiling with her whole face. They photographed Vincent Jr., making collections at various businesses his father operated. They photographed Carmela feeding her pigeons, crossing herself, eating her eggs and toast. They documented patterns. Maria got her hair done every Tuesday at 3 p.m. at a salon on Wilshire. Angela went to movies with friends most Friday nights. Sophia's riding lessons were at Griffith Park Stables, always at 10 a.m. on Saturdays. Vincent Jr. drove the same route through East L.A. every Thursday collecting protection money. They photographed the houses, the cars, the churches, the schools. They photographed these people going about their lives, completely unaware they were being watched, documented, studied. Every vulnerability, every routine, every place where they were exposed, cataloged. Jack Morrison personally oversaw the creation of the album. It was a professional photo album, leather-bound, expensive, the kind you might give as a wedding present. Inside were clear, high-quality photographs arranged chronologically, documenting a week in the life of Vincent Romano's family. The first page showed his house at dawn, lights just coming on. The next page showed Maria leaving for morning shopping, walking to her car, unaware. Then Angela at school, laughing with friends. Sophia on her horse. Carmela at church, her weathered face peaceful as she prayed. Vincent Jr. collecting money, looking tough in his leather jacket, but also young, vulnerable. Page after page, the album told a story. We were there. We watched. We could have done anything. We saw everyone you love in moments when they were completely unprotected. On the final page, Dean had written a note by hand on his personal stationery. His handwriting was clear, steady, each word precisely chosen. You humiliated my wife in public. I could have destroyed your world without anyone ever seeing me. But I'm not you. This is your only warning. Walk away and never come back. There was no signature. None was needed. The package arrived at Vincent Romano's house on a Tuesday morning, March 26, 1963, 9 days after the incident at Ciro's. It was delivered by standard postal service, wrapped in plain brown paper, no return address. Maria signed for it. Assuming it was something Vinnie had ordered, Vinnie was eating breakfast in his dining room, reading the racing forms, when Maria brought it in. Package for you, she said, setting it on the table. Vinnie looked at it without much interest, then used a knife to cut through the wrapping. Inside was a leather album, expensive looking. Probably some kind of promotional thing, he thought. Casino owners and club managers were always sending him gifts, trying to stay on his good side. He opened it casually, expecting photographs of a new club or restaurant. What he saw instead made his blood run cold. His house. His actual house, photographed at dawn. He turned the page. Maria, leaving the house, getting in her car. The angle of the photo was from across the street, maybe 50 yards away. Whoever took this had been watching his home. Vinnie's hand started to shake as he turned more pages. Angela at school, her face clearly visible, identifiable. Sophia on her horse, smiling, completely vulnerable. His mother feeding pigeons. The photo taken from maybe 10 feet away. "Oh, Jesus," Vinnie whispered. "Oh, Jesus Christ." More pages. Maria at the salon, sitting under the hairdryer, unaware. Vincent Jr. walking out of a building in East L.A. where he'd been making collections. They followed his son. The photographs were time-stamped. They'd been watching for days, maybe a week. They'd documented everything. Vinnie's heart was pounding so hard he thought he might be having a heart attack. This wasn't a threat from a rival organization. Rival organizations would have just killed you or hit your businesses. This was something else. This was psychological warfare. This was someone showing him that they could reach anyone he loved anytime they wanted. He turned to the last page and saw the note. Read it once, then again. No signature. But Vinnie knew exactly who'd sent this. There was only one person who had a reason. Only one person he'd wronged recently. Jeanne Martin. But how? How did a singer, an entertainer, put together a surveillance operation like this? How did he have the resources, the connections, the sophistication to document Vinnie's entire family without any of Vinnie's people noticing? Where did an entertainer get access to the kind of professionals who could do this? The answer hit Vinnie like a sledgehammer. Because Jeanne Martin wasn't just an entertainer. He never had been. He'd been playing a role, the easygoing, laid-back crooner, while building something else entirely. He had relationships, real relationships with powerful people. He had resources. He had reach. And Vinnie had slapped his wife in front of witnesses and thought there would be no consequences because entertainers were beneath him. Maria came back into the dining room. "Vinnie, what's wrong? You look pale." Vinnie closed the album quickly. "Nothing. I'm fine." But his voice was shaking. "Listen, Maria, I need you to pack a bag. You and the girls are going to visit your sister in Chicago for a while." "What?" "Vinnie, Angela has school, and Sophia has her riding lesson." "Today?" Vinnie said, his voice hard now with panic. "You're leaving today. I'll call Vincent Jr. Tell him to go stay with his cousin in New York for a few weeks." "Vinnie, what's going on?" "Nothing. A business thing. Just a precaution. Please, Maria. Trust me. Today." The fear in his voice scared her more than anything he could have said. Maria had been married to Vinnie for 23 years. She knew what he was, knew the things he was capable of, and she'd never seen him look afraid. Not once. Until now. The retreat. Within 24 hours, Vincent Romano's family was scattered across the country. Maria and the girls were in Chicago. Vincent Jr. was in New York. Vinnie's mother was the hardest to move. She didn't understand why she suddenly had to leave her house and stay with relatives in New Jersey. But Vinnie insisted, almost begged. Then Vinnie started making phone calls. He reached out to his capo regime, the man he reported to in the organization, told him he needed to step back from California operations, that there had been a complication, that it would be better for family if he handled business from back east for a while. "What kind of complication?" his boss asked. "A misunderstanding with someone connected. It's being handled, but it's better if I'm not in LA right now." There were questions, but Vinnie was vague. He couldn't admit what had really happened, that he'd slapped an entertainer's wife and the entertainer had scared him into leaving town. That would make him look weak. It would make him look foolish. So he invented a story about a business deal gone wrong, about needing to lay low until things cooled down. Within a week, Vincent Romano was back in New York. He sold his house in Hancock Park at a loss, liquidated his California business interests, and never returned to Los Angeles. His wife and daughters were confused, uprooted from their lives. But Vinnie couldn't explain. How do you tell your family that you're running away because someone showed you photographs of them? How do you admit that someone made you feel powerless without ever raising a hand? The story of what happened spread through certain circles, the quiet networks where power and influence intersected. It reached casino owners in Las Vegas. It reached studio executives in Hollywood. It reached other organized crime figures who operated in California. The reaction was fascinating. Nobody blamed Jeanne Martin. Nobody thought he'd overreacted or gone too far. If anything, the consensus was that he'd shown remarkable restraint. He could have had Romano killed. He could have burned down his businesses. He could have hurt his family. Instead, he'd shown Romano what was possible and then offered him a way out. Disappear and everyone stays safe. What impressed people most was the sophistication of it. This wasn't a thug's response, all rage and violence. This was strategic, psychological, devastating in its precision. Jeanne Martin had taught Vincent Romano a lesson about power that Romano would never forget. True power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to prove anything. It simply is. The unspoken rule. In the months and years that followed, a new understanding emerged in the worlds where Hollywood and organized crime intersected. Jeanne Martin was off limits. But more than that, his family was off limits. His friends were off limits. Anyone who worked with him, who was under protection, they were off limits too. It wasn't because people feared Dean would have them killed. It was because they feared something worse, that he would make them feel powerless, that he would strip away their illusion of control and show them how vulnerable they really were. Violence could be answered with violence. But what Dean had done to Vincent Romano, that psychological dismantling, there was no good response to that. You either accepted it and ran, like Romano had, or you escalated into a conflict you couldn't win. The incident also changed how people saw Jeanne Martin. Oh! He still played the same role in public. The easygoing crooner, the drunk who wasn't really drunk, the guy who made everything look effortless. But now, people who were paying attention saw something else underneath. They saw calculation. They saw steel. They saw a man who understood power in ways most people never would. Frank Sinatra heard the story and called Dean, furious that Dean hadn't told him what happened. "I would have handled it," Frank said. "I know," Dean replied. "That's why I didn't tell you. You would have handled it the Frank way. This needed a different approach. You could have started a war." "No," Dean said calmly. "I ended one before it started. Romano hit Jeanne because he thought I was weak, thought entertainers were beneath him. I showed him that assessment was incorrect. Now he's gone, Jeanne's safe, and nobody died. That's a win, Frank." Sinatra was quiet for a moment. Then, "You're scarier than I am, you know that?" "I'm not scary at all," Dean said. "I'm just clear about boundaries. Cross them, and there are consequences. Most people understand that. Romano learned it the hard way." Jeanne Martin never spoke publicly about what happened that night at Ciro's or about what Dean did in response. But in private, with close friends, she told them about the conversation she and Dean had the day after he sent the package. "I asked him if he was going to have Romano killed," Jeanne said, "and Dean looked at me like I'd said something crazy. He said, 'Why would I do that? That would make me a killer.' What I did made him afraid. Fear is more useful than death. A dead man can't tell others to stay away from you. A scared man tells everyone." That was Dean Martin's genius. He understood that reputation, properly managed, was more powerful than any weapon. Vincent Romano disappeared from California, but the story of why he disappeared, that stayed. It circulated. It became legend. And every time someone heard it, they learned the same lesson. Don't cross Dean Martin. The incident also created a protective bubble around other members of the Rat Pack and their families. If Dean Martin was willing to go to such lengths for his wife, what would he do for his friends? For Sammy Davis Jr., who already faced enough threats? For Frank's family? For Peter and Joey? The uncertainty was a point. Nobody wanted to find out. The nature of true power. Years later, in 1978, Dean Martin did an interview with Barbara Walters. She asked him about his image, about being seen as a laid-back member of the Rat Pack, the funny drunk. "Do you think people underestimate you?" she asked. Dean smiled that famous Dean Martin smile. "I hope so. Underestimation is a gift. If people think you're just a clown, they don't see you coming." "Coming where?" "Wherever you need to be." Dean said, "Look, Barbara, I learned a long time ago that the world respects two things: actual power and the appearance of power. Most people only have one or the other. The trick is having both, but only showing one at a time." He didn't elaborate, but people who knew the Romano story understood what he meant. To the public, Dean Martin showed the appearance of easygoing charm. Behind that, he held actual power, real influence, genuine capability. And he only revealed that power when absolutely necessary. What happened with Vincent Romano became a case study in how to handle threats when you exist in a gray area between legitimate and illegitimate worlds. Dean Martin couldn't go to the police. They wouldn't have helped. He couldn't rely on violence. That would have started a war he didn't want. So instead, he did something smarter. He showed Romano the scope of his reach, the sophistication of his resources, and the discipline of his restraint. The message wasn't, "I will hurt you." The message was, "I can hurt everything you love anytime I want, but I'm choosing not to, as long as you disappear." That choice, that demonstration of controlled power, was more terrifying than any threat. Other entertainers learned from this. When Johnny Carson had trouble with mob-connected club owners in the late 1960s, he didn't fight them directly. He used Dean's playbook: documentation, pressure through channels, making the cause of continued harassment greater than the benefit. It worked because Dean Martin had shown it could work. The Romano incident also demonstrated something important about Dean's relationship with Jeanne. He didn't see protecting her as a matter of masculine pride or ego. He saw it as a matter of simple justice. Someone had hurt his wife, humiliated her publicly, and that couldn't stand. Not because it made him look weak, but because Jeanne deserved better. She deserved to feel safe, to be treated with respect, to live without fear. That distinction mattered. This wasn't about Dean's ego. It was about Jeanne's dignity. And that made his response proportional, controlled, and ultimately more effective. He wasn't lashing out in anger. He was solving a problem. The final chapter. Vincent Romano died in 1989 in Queens, New York. His obituary listed him as a retired import-export businessman. He never returned to California. He never spoke publicly about what happened that March night in 1963 or about the package he received 9 days later. But people close to him said he kept that leather album locked in a safe in his house, that sometimes, late at night, he'd take it out and look through it, remembering. His son, Vincent Jr., once asked him about Jeanne Martin, about why they'd left California so suddenly, why Vinnie always changed the channel when Jeanne appeared on television, why he refused to listen to his music. Some lessons cost everything. Vinnie told his son, "I learned mine. Don't ever forget. The most dangerous people are the ones who don't need to prove how dangerous they are." Jeanne Martin died in 1995, on Christmas Day. He was 78 years old. His funeral was attended by Hollywood royalty, by people from every phase of his career. Jeanne was there, his second wife, the woman he protected so fiercely decades earlier. They divorced in 1973, but they'd remained close, remained friends. At the reception after the funeral, an elderly man approached Jeanne. She didn't recognize him at first, but then he introduced himself as Jack Morrison, the private investigator who'd worked for Jeanne back in the 1960s. "Mrs. Martin, I'm sorry for your loss. Jeanne was a remarkable man." "Thank you, Jack. I remember you. You did some work for us." "I did," Jack said. "And I wanted you to know something. I worked for a lot of people over my career. Politicians, studio heads, businessmen, some good people and some not so good. But Jeanne Martin was different. He had power, real power, the kind most people never see. But he used it carefully. He used it for protection, not conquest. That Romano business, I've thought about a lot over the years. What Jeanne did, it was a masterpiece of strategy and restraint. He could have destroyed that man completely. Instead, he just moved him off the board." Jeanne's eyes filled with tears. Jeanne never wanted to hurt anyone. He just wanted people to be safe. "He wanted me to be safe." "And you were," Jack said. "After that, everyone knew. You touched Jeanne Martin's family. You answer to someone who doesn't play by the rules you expect. That's a powerful deterrent." After Jack left, Jeanne sat alone for a moment, remembering that night at Ciro's, the shock and humiliation of being slapped in public. Remembering Dean's quiet rage, his controlled response. Remembering the peace that came after, knowing that Jeanne had handled it, that she was protected, that no one would dare try something like that again. The story of Vincent Romano and the package became one of those Hollywood legends that people whispered about that took on mythic proportions. Some versions had Jeanne Martin hiring ex-CIA agents to conduct surveillance. Some had him calling in favors from mob bosses more powerful than Romano. Some had the package containing actual threats of violence. But the truth was simpler and somehow more powerful. Jeanne Martin had used money, connections, and professional investigators to document what was already true, that Vincent Romano and everyone he loved were vulnerable every single day. He didn't create the vulnerability. He just made Romano aware of it. Then he offered him a choice: leave and everyone stays safe, or stay and find out what happens next. Romano chose to leave, and in choosing to leave, he validated everything Jeanne Martin had demonstrated. Power isn't about what you do. It's about what people believe you're capable of doing. The legacy. The incident at Ciro's and Jeanne Martin's response became a defining moment in understanding the complex relationship between Hollywood and organized crime in the 1960s. For years, the conventional wisdom was that mobsters controlled entertainers, that they owned the clubs and casinos where performers worked, and therefore had leverage. But Jeanne Martin proved that relationship was more complicated. Yes, organized crime had financial power and the capacity for violence. But entertainers, the successful ones, had something else. Visibility, connections, public sympathy, and in some cases, like Jeanne's, the intelligence to build their own networks of influence. Jeanne Martin never tried to destroy organized crime. He wasn't on a crusade. He simply established that he and his family existed outside the normal hierarchy that men like Vincent Romano believed in. He wasn't above them or below them. He was separate, protected by different rules, different consequences. That separation was crucial. It meant that when Romano struck Jeanne, he wasn't hitting the wife of an underling or someone in the organization's sphere of control. He was hitting the wife of an independent operator, someone with his own power base. And independent operators with power dawn